Make sure you do your due diligence before you start printing off a bunch of, t-shirts and putting your name on a bunch of products. Okay, the easy thing to do is just to do a search online, because, unless for some reason someone registered it and they haven't, gotten into, putting up websites and things like that. But yeah. Okay. Questions about that? I mean, you don't want to spend the time and the effort, honestly, to develop your own trademark, just to come along and find, once you've put all that effort into it, that somebody else is doing something similar, and then you get a cease and desist letter. All right. The other thing I said you could do is to keep it secret, trade secrets. Okay. Trade secrets, generally, we're talking about things like customer lists. So a client list, those are often considered trade secrets. If you're talking with a company, you enter into an agreement, they might mention trade secrets. We do not like trade secrets at universities. We do not want people to share trade secrets with us, because trade secrets last indefinitely. Okay. As long as they're kept secret, it is a trade secret. So, other things, the copyrights, the trademarks. I mean, the trademarks are going to last when you're using it. Copyrights. It's an interesting story if anybody does want to look it up. But the reason that copyrights last so long has a lot to do with Disney and Disney's lobbying of Congress for many years, and getting the copyrights laws changed so many times. The whole reason that Steamboat Willie's is now, out of trademark, because it's like the life of the inventor plus 70 years, that type of thing. The copyrights last for a very long time. Okay. Trade secrets, though, they do last a lot longer. And patents, depending on the type of patent, but generally last as long as you keep it alive. You pay the maintenance fees, you pay the annuity fees. It's going to last 20 or 21 years, depending on what type of application that you file from the date of filing. Okay, and that can be extended if the patent office takes too long. It can actually be extended a little bit longer than that. And if it's something that's like, high secrecy, you can actually keep a patent secret as well, but it's gotta really like be national security type of thing. Okay. So you could keep it secret if you've got a really great idea. Now, somebody else comes along and they invent it first, they file a patent first. We are a first to file country now. So if they file a patent first, then there's nothing that you can do with it. Okay. You can use it. Okay, you could just publish it. There is some strategy to not filing a patent and just publishing it, because that prevents other people from getting a patent on it. So it gives you this a concept of you're then free to operate. You can use it as a shield. If you publish something and then you just do that, nobody else down the line can come and sue you, because you're just doing what's already in the public domain, which, again, maybe you put there, maybe you didn't, but you're just doing something that's in the public domain. So it can work as a shield if you just use it. Now, if somebody else comes along and they do it easier, cheaper, quicker, there's nothing you can do, right? That's the whole point of patents, is to prevent somebody else from doing the same thing quicker and easier and cheaper than you. All right, and stopping them from doing the same thing. Okay, yes, absolutely. You could start a business, you could license it to a company. Again, you do have to enforce it. With things like software, you could give it away. Right. And so that does happen. There's plenty of people and employees and faculty members and researchers that just want to publish and give their software away as open source. Okay. We're amenable to it, but my advice would be that, obviously, if it's UNLV intellectual property, if there was some money, state, federal, especially these days, if there was some sort of funding that went into it, you really don't have the right to give it away yourself. And just there could be repercussions. It's not going to be coming from me per se, but just, there could be repercussions. So the safe thing to do would be to contact me, would be to contact my office, say that, you've developed some software, did use state, federal, university funds, and you would like some help to make it open source, and we can get that squared away the right way. I think we still have a decent amount of time here. So just talking about agreements, any kind of intellectual property, any kind of work you do, any kind of work you do with companies, you really want to make sure that you have a good agreement in place. Now, if you are a university employee, if you're a grad student, you're receiving stipend, come to my office, help, or just obviously just email me or give me a call. But, we can help with that. The signature delegation at universities is very specific. So, even for me, right? But researchers, faculty members, certainly grad students cannot sign documents that bind the university. That has to be very specific how the signature authority works. So that's just number one. There's a lot of different types of agreements, and if somebody even calls it a non-disclosure agreement, so let's just say you were doing a, class project and you're working with a company, and the company wants you to keep information confidential, and you're signing that on your own. I mean, that's your bank account, that's your life, that's your savings, that's on the line if you breach it, right? Um, so definitely there's a lot of benefit to being under the university umbrella rather than signing things on your own if you don't have to. But also keep in mind that it doesn't matter what the agreement title says. So a non-disclosure agreement might have something in it that says, and you also agree to assign any intellectual property that you develop to the company. Okay. You do have to be careful. The title and type of agreement does not matter. The terms very much do. Okay, always be thinking about ownership, what's going on, what are your rights and responsibilities. But these are just all types of agreements that our office helps with. Again, license agreements, option agreements. If somebody's interested in, say, IP sharing, say spinning in a technology as opposed to pushing out, we do that as well. For limited circumstances, say if it's like a student that's working with the university or an alumni or something like that, where they want to give the intellectual property rights to the university in return for an added share. Okay, memorandums of understanding, this is the worst one. This is the biggest red flag. If you are ever in the situation where you're entering into a memorandum of understanding, I would say 80 to 90% of the time you might be doing something wrong. Okay. Memorandums of understanding are intentionally supposed to not be contracts. They should not technically require a signature. Almost everybody asks for one, don't get me wrong, but a memorandum of understanding is a non-legally binding contract, therefore it should not require a signature. It's not much different than a letter of intent, but it shouldn't really have specific terms, rights, responsibilities in it. It's just a memorandum, just a memo of understanding, not a contract. But again, a lot of people treat them as contracts. Okay. And I talked a little bit about this, but things to pay attention to when you enter into a contract. And again, I've seen it so many times where, say students or employees want to enter into a contract with a company and they really aren't paying attention to things, or even just like work for hire, right? You're just hiring a company to do something. Make sure you understand what your commitments are, how long it's going to last. Just because it's a confidentiality agreement, normally there's a term for having those discussions. You're going to have discussions over the next 2 years, but then you also agree to keep it secret for another 2, 3, 4 years. And a lot of big companies will toss their weight around and they'll just say they want you to keep it confidential indefinitely. Okay. But these are just some common things to look for. If again, the way we see it pop up a lot in a university setting is maybe we have a faculty member, a researcher that wants to go visit or do a tour at a company, right? And the company just provides them with a non-disclosure agreement on site and say you can't come in unless you sign this. Well, don't sign it. I mean, you're signing it on your own, not as a member of the university. And I can't guarantee that even if you sent it to me, we could get it done quickly because Nevada has a lot of rules and regulations about what contracts can be signed. For example, anything over 5 years has to be reviewed and signed by the president and then she and others. So, yeah, just some things to keep in mind when it gets to agreements. Okay. I am going to open it up for questions, but just, if in your time at UNLV, you feel like you might be an inventor on something, you're not sure, again, brainstorming sessions, very important. Okay, the claims are very important. It's never too early to disclose an invention. Sometimes, though, it is impossible to tell who an actual inventor will be when the time you disclose that invention. So, the way the patents work in general, the early patent application, the early stages, we just really need one inventor to put their name on it. But it's not like publication. They're very different things. Okay. You could have a publication with 10 people on it. A patent on that same thing might just have one inventor, right? Very different things. But if anytime you think there might be an invention, encourage or file something with my office to get the conversation started. Encourage, faculty mentors and advisors to file something with our office to submit an invention disclosure. Okay, the earlier the better. And then just keep in mind that when you're doing work, when you're doing research, when you're working as grad students, that you're really considering, are you contributing to the conception? and not just doing work. Again, it's very important to me. I mean, I really appreciate the graduate students. They tend to know a lot more at times than the faculty members themselves. So they are crucial to my process, but just, for your own sake, if it's important to you to be an inventor, to take part in our distribution policy, then make sure that you're contributing to brainstorming and conception of the idea. And then, similarly, if you're just interested in engaging with industry. So if any of you are doing research, or even just, again, doesn't have to be patents, doesn't have to be, research that will necessarily be commercialized. If you're looking for other people who are doing similar things in industry, we can help look that up. If you're looking for other collaborators at other institutions, we can help look that up too. If you're just looking for see, who's filing patents and who's, what other patents are existing in this space, sometimes that's helpful and that can help steer research in a particular direction as well. Last thing, I already mentioned the graduate assistant. So, tech transfer, this type of work again, what I do isn't necessarily that heavy on patents or intellectual property and law. But it does come into play. You have research, you want someone wants to start up a company, all of these things are relevant. Sometimes that company is based on a trademark. Sometimes it's based on a copyright. Sometimes it is based on a patent. Sometimes it's based on know-how. It just doesn't fit. It's really just an idea, but you're just such an expert that nobody knows how to do it. And you could write it all down. You could create a copyright. You could create, say, a manual, a teaching manual, or some sort of instruction manual. Okay, but there are other student opportunities. So Rebel Forge helps out with student startup groups. We're always looking for interns. Really anything that you do as grad students where, you want to do something more than publish, Economic Development Office can help. Okay, we're trying to get more involved with capstone projects. Again, it's a little bit tricky just because, depending on the type of students, and some grad students are employees and some grad students aren't. So, it really just depends on what kind of funding, and if you qualify as using significant use of university resources, you kind of go back to one of those earlier slides. Do you count as an employee for NSHE or for the university? And it's pretty wide ranging definition of that. Okay, so I'm not necessarily looking like saying you have to have an interest in law or a background in business. But if you're interested in working for, again, Economic Development Office, either as, in the Small Business Development Center, they're always hiring interns, or on the tech transfer side of things and working with inventions and companies and patents and IP and copyrights and trademarks and things like that, definitely shoot me an email and let me know, and we'll have you fill out an application. Okay, well, we're here to help. Our office is here to help with anything that involves research, anything that involves inventions, any kind of intellectual property. Please do make sure to reach out to me into my office, and I'm happy to discuss. Okay, questions. Computing journal described manuscript looks more favorable for peer review. Program code is shared with the journal on GitHub. Okay, should we check with the university or federal agency that funded before publishing the code? Yes, absolutely. At the end of the day, look, if something gets published, it happens, right? University isn't going to catch everything all the time. Okay, but if there is any funding, there is a funding agreement, and that funding agreement will tell you what you can and cannot do. And especially if you're working with industry, almost always industry is going to have a paragraph in that agreement saying, you have to give us 90 days. You have to disclose the invention to us. You can't do it until we approve, things like, well, but also that approval won't be unreasonably withheld. Okay. But it absolutely matters what the agreement says. And also keep in mind that, yes, if there's university rights to it, you really should check in to see, because if it's like almost the worst case scenario. If it goes on to make millions of dollars, then the university might get mad at that point that that anybody took university intellectual property and just gave it away without consulting somebody. So it's just in everybody's best interest. If you're excited about it, if you think it's valuable, again, contact me. I'm happy. And if you look through the policy, you'll see that it is actually my responsibility to determine whether or not something belongs to the university. So what I will say to you is if you don't think it's university property, you're welcome to. You're not required to, but you're welcome to shoot me an email and saying, here's what I'm developing. I did it all outside of the university. I didn't use any university resources and just lay it out to create that paper trail. If you want me to take a look at it and just make a determination, I'm happy to do that. Again, if there's any state, federal, university funding, that's probably going to be the main criteria for whether or not it's university owned. But it's not a bad thing. You can still go on to create a business. You can still take a distribution. I mean, if your business is making money, you'll get, say 90% of the income or whatever percentage based on your business or startup agreement, who knows what that would be. But you'll get some percentage of that business. Any money that comes back to the university, you still get 60% of that as well. So it's very, very profitable and if you think about patents, one of the best things about university IP is that, again, because we own it, we'll license it to a company. If that company fails, we pull it back and we can license it back out. Students' rights and responsibilities as creators in graduate school, particularly in terms of intellectual property and use. Yes, it does depend very much as to whether or not they are students or employees. And generally speaking, I feel like nobody really wants to hear this, but most graduate students, they're getting stipends, they're doing work for the university, they're doing work in a lab. They don't have rights to the intellectual property. I mean, they have rights on a distribution policy, but even say their lab notebooks belong to the university. Okay, so again, thinking about copyrights, right? Under their employment agreements, the intellectual property developed and even the lab notebooks belong to the university. So, in terms of times are changing. Again, keep in mind that the university as a whole has requirements to report back to the federal government. Okay, and this has been really big into the news lately. But if we're receiving federal funding, the university has a responsibility to report back any inventions from its employees, any inventions that were created from federal funding. And so if we're not told that and say, well, again, it doesn't matter if it's a student, but any kind of employee, just gives it away, right? That could have ramifications. Now, historically, nothing has happened, but I just don't know these days. There are compliance issues. And there are requirements and responsibilities that all employees have to report their inventions. And so if it doesn't get reported to my office and ends up making billions of dollars, I think they might have some issues. So there are some responsibilities. Anytime there's any kind of university involvement, any kind of university and funding as employees under your employment agreement, and just again, as the university as a whole, we do have responsibilities and requirements to report inventions that come out of federal funding. And again, a lot of benefits too, especially at UNLV, 60% of distribution policy. So, I mean, I just take it from there. I'm the one that's calling up, industry and looking for partners. I'm obviously happy to have help from any of the inventors or creators to help make that happen. But, that could be a nice, royalty stream coming in. Especially as students or for long term for the next 20 years or for a patent, it could be a long-term royalty stream. There's upfront payments for licenses, there's milestone payments, there's a lot of different ways that licenses are written. And for me, I really do try to work with all of our inventors to make sure that everybody's satisfied, everybody kind of understands, okay, what happens if and when $1 million comes in, how does it get distributed? Okay. But again, the main question here really comes down to, are you an employee? Is there substantial use of university resources? And again, we have a UNLV policy, right? And then we have an NSHE policy talking about personnel and use of significant resources. So that's why I put this in here, especially for the graduate students, just so you kind of know. But if you have to start out with, are you a university employee or are you separate? Are you using significant use of university resources? If it's for a class project, there are some exceptions set aside in the policy. So again, it's not, in my opinion, it's not the best policy, copyright policy anyway. So it does take a little bit of reading and understanding. And so worst case scenario, you provide me with an email, you shoot me an email, we talk about it. we can get it figured out. And then again, if it does fall under the university umbrella, I can help. And there's a lot of stuff that the Economic Development Office can do to help move stuff along. So similarly, if don't just say it's yours for the sake of saying it's yours if you're not going to do anything with it. If it's the universities, then I can put all of our resources behind it too. If it's not the universities, I can't because, as a nonprofit, we can't be helping, for-profits with their businesses, even if they say we're students. It's my hands are a little bit tied as to what I can do. Yes, and so good question. So how can students navigate intellectual properties working with industry partners, government agencies, external collaborators, right? So, first thing, it's going to depend on whether or not you're students or whether you're employees. Because if you're, as a grad student, but you're an employee, you're again, that falls directly under what I can do to help. So with agreements, with intellectual property issues, I am here to help. Right. That is a big part of my job is helping determine, what do we do, working on those contracts, helping with patent filings, trademark registrations, all of that. And I can guarantee you, almost every single major company we work with, they are a real pain when it comes to the contracts. They stick in these little sentences that will try to get you. They have attorneys and these big law firms that work for them. So if you read an agreement, it's hard enough on my end because I have to read every single sentence to know if they're trying to trick us. And then I ask them to take it out and they're like, oh, why do you want to do that? So it's tough. If you're just a student, I'm happy to talk with you. I talked with some of the student teams at the last President's Innovation Challenge and just gave them some advice on slides, for patents, for example. If you have something that you think is an invention, you generally want to talk about the what it is, not the how it works. Okay, so what you're doing, but not how it works. Say if there are chemical compounds, you can talk about we found a new compound and it does this. But you don't talk about, exactly what the compound is, what the interactions are, what the mechanism is. You do try to just kind of edit out and block out certain parts of it so you're not describing the whole thing. And similarly, again, with some other groups, I just said, look, take this slide out, cut this part out, again, focus on what it's doing, but don't specifically say how it works, because if you disclose that how piece, then you're no longer going to be able to get a patent on it. And again, with industry partners, they really push their weight around. So just be careful. Oftentimes my advice is going to be to consider getting an outside attorney, to consult an attorney, because I cannot give legal advice. I just can't. Happy to discuss with anybody and point you in the right direction. But I cannot give any legal advice for students or for anybody. But there's a lot more I can do if you're an employee than if you're just, a student. Yeah, government agency agreements tend to be take it or leave it. So, you don't really have a ton of choice, but they're actually usually okay. If you're getting funding from the government, usually the terms are reasonable. They do know that you expect to publish. So that's not as bad. But if you're not careful, you might end up with some, even for like a capstone project. I've seen that happen before, where a student did a capstone project with somebody in industry with a company, and they get all the way through their capstone project only to find out that the company won't let them present. Okay. And that can be a really big problem because they say that everything that they did was confidential and they didn't agree to it in the first place about what could be presented and what can't be presented. I'll stop sharing.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're ever in town, again, come see us. The building's in the background in my picture, but it's like kitty corner from IKEA, so just off the freeway, off of Buffalo and Decatur. You'll see a UNLV building off the freeway there. That's where we're located in Spring Valley. It's not the most convenient, I understand that, but it's a lot of parking. It's a really neat building to see. There's even some casino games in there that don't cost money. If you want to play Wheel of Fortune for a while without losing all your money, you could give it a try at our office. But
Okay, well, before we end today's session, I would like to thank our presenter, Michael, for sharing his time and his expertise with us today. And thank you to our participants for joining us today. Thanks again, everybody, and thanks, Michael, for being here.
yeah, thanks all.